Everybody excited to consider patience and diligence? Well, I sure thought of all of you today when I was reflecting on patience and diligence. Just such a wonderful couple of days it's been sitting with all of you, and wow, the way everybody's showing up for their practice and helping each other out. It's been really wonderful. So there is, I don't know, I don't think I ever really thought about that before, but you know what happens when you put a bunch of diligent people together in a room working on something together can really be joyful, really be incredible. So as we've been doing, we'll consider these two paramitas, these perfections of patience and diligence. And with each one of these, as we're doing on the other nights, you know, just looking into what is special about these concepts that these words stand for. You know, of all of the words, why these 6? There must be something to it. I trust that there's something to it. And I appreciate the opportunity to look into it. I wouldn't be spending all this time considering it if you weren't here. So as with all of them, you know, the paramitas are intertwined with our personal experience of emptiness. So we'll take a look at how our experience of these concepts or traits might change, or seem to change, or appear to change. I think I really like these two because they sound so ordinary and we can relate in some way. You know, I guess I would think the normal way I would think of patience that might be common for many people would be a kind of forbearance, like dealing with something that maybe we don't really want to deal with, so it takes some effort. I feel like that's implied, and you know, in the word patience, is that it takes a little effort to be with something, and so there must be some part of a person that doesn't want to. That kind of, you know, being polite, being considerate, not acting out if you feel an impatience, choosing patience, choosing the opposite of I don't want to. And a funny thing about this one to me is, this is, you know, maybe all of you have something like this too, like a way that people saw you growing up or have always seen you that you kind of knew was not really the thing that was going on inside. And this was one that, you know, I was always seen as very patient, like a calm and patient person, even from the time I was little. But I know, you know, by the time I grew up, by the time I was a young adult, I had a strong dissonance with that because I knew that inside I was roiling inside and had a lot of anxiety and a lot of impatience and a lot of judgment and agitation, you know. Like every antonym there is for patience, I had that. But I don't know. We all come wired differently, and it just never seemed prudent to me to act out impatience. It's always kind of like rational too, very practical, and it's like, well, I may feel that way, but if I act on it, things are for sure going to go badly. So, so I just kept it to myself. But is that patience? I mean, it's interesting to consider then. Is that patience? And then eventually, as an adult, I found out through getting uncomfortable enough, like, maybe all of us have, getting uncomfortable enough that you start looking into things. It's like, let's go to some therapy, or whatever it is, meditation, whatever it is. And was really like shocked, just like totally dumbfounded to find out how much fear and insecurity, these kinds of things were really going on inside. I didn't even know. I didn't even know they were there because I was so quick to not be here. I was so quick to not be with it, I didn't even know it was there. So then, then I feel like I started getting these benefits of a deeper kind of patience with practice eventually, with meditation, getting to know this quality that we call equanimity, like patience that I actually feel. So instead of just not acting out, I began to feel like I'm okay with the thing that's happening right now, even if it's not what I would have chosen. Like, I accept that it's happening. This kind of equanimity. I feel like, that's really closely related to patience, deeper kind of patience. And I think I read this somewhere. I think that's why this came up, is this idea that this kind of equanimity, and this patience, it's included in the paramitas in part because it's so critical for integrating insights, for tolerating insight, to be able to have the kind of equanimity that can hold and not shudder in the face of impermanence and corelessness and unsatisfactoriness. Or maybe only shudder a little, but still be able to face it. But I don't remember if it was last night or the night before that I also touched on how much words seem to change, and I feel like this about all of these paramitas, that they can be so different. The words stand for something so different depending on what someone's interior landscape is like. And so, I think it was last night I gave the example of, Gary Weber and somebody telling him he was generous, and he was like, I have no such thing. Which, he didn't have to say. He could have agreed and said like, oh, thank you, I appreciate that. Because it appeared generous to that person. So it's like, that's fine. Sometimes you can just meet words where they work well. But by the same token, I suspect that somebody with that degree of insight, or Ursula's degree of insight, doesn't put much thought into being generous or patient. because each of those is just, patience also. Why would she have, now I'm thinking of Ursula, that's why I say she, why would she have an idea that she needed to do something other than obviously what needed to be done? The kind of thing that would require patience as we normally know it. And yet, things can appear to be patient. So, I came across something, a while back when I first read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is a beautiful classic if anybody is looking for a book to read and doesn't have this one yet, by Shunryu Suzuki, and each chapter is on a topic, and there's one that's called Constancy. And so it's, I think it's a useful way to consider what might look to us like patience and not be if it were being experienced by the person. We think someone's demonstrating patience, but if that person has such a profound insight into emptiness that they don't perceive any meaningful separation between themselves and anyone else or anything else, then what might that look like? And so he offered this really great little thing on the word patience. He said, the usual translation of the Japanese word nin is patience, but perhaps constancy is a better word. You must force yourself to be patient, but in constancy, there's no particular effort involved. There's only the unchanging ability to accept things as they are. For people who have no idea of emptiness, this ability may appear to be patience, but patience can actually be non-acceptance. People who know, even if only intuitively, the state of emptiness always have open the possibility of accepting things as they are. They can appreciate everything. And many of you have heard me quote this other part of the chapter that's one of my favorites, that likens this state of constancy to the sky. When you listen to our teaching with a pure, clear mind, you can accept it as if you were hearing something which you already knew. This is called emptiness, or knowing everything. When you know everything, you're like a dark sky. Sometimes a flashing will come through the dark sky. After it passes, you forget all about it, and there's nothing left but the dark sky. The sky is never surprised when all of a sudden a thunderbolt breaks through. So noteworthy, I think, that these are in the same passage. This passage about the endless dark sky that is not rattled when there's lightning. A view of what we might call patience, what would look like patience if that sky were a person. But from the vantage point of the sky, it's not troubled, it's not trying, it's not dealing with it. Yeah, dealing with it, and yet there is this need for diligence, and diligence being like an earnest, a sincere effort, putting effort into something. diligence, they say, is important on this kind of path to overcome obstacles. So there's this assumption that there's obstacles. Oh no. Yeah, it's not going to be easy like my life has been so far. This is one of the things, I remember before I got into meditation, I was like, that Buddhist stuff, that's not for me. Like, it just leads with suffering. I'm looking for not suffering. But I totally like it now. It's just like, I'm just like, they're just freaking truth tellers, It's just like, look, they're suffering. It's like, okay. So, diligence to overcome obstacles. And I know, those of you I talk to a lot have heard me say too, that it's really just such a good thing I don't get to make my own choices about what's going to happen, what's going to come down the pike. Because I would choose it to be fun and simple and easy. That's what I would choose. I would still choose that. And I had fun at dinner tonight, but I didn't choose that either. But the earnestness that's been required to go through and just, stay on the path, keep practicing. Obstacles come, they come for all of us. And if we are aware of the kinds of supports that'll get us through it, well, if we have, some basic humility and equanimity to realize that we're not going to get around it, so we might as well go through it with good company, with good tools. And that's what gets us the insight and the richness and the fulfillment in life, going through these things. But this diligence too, I was thinking of that too, and all these, different stages, this initial, maybe easier to understand what, whenever we all first learned this word diligence, I would think of it as being diligent. What does diligent look like? It would look to me like being consistent. I always think of accountability. Maybe that's just because of how I'm wired, that I wasn't able to be consistent without accountability. And, I didn't like either one of those for a long time. I wasn't good at consistency or accountability. I always wanted to, somehow be somewhere else, even when I was doing what I liked. When I was thinking about like all the consistency that it took to play the piano or do dance lessons or something, I still kind of tried to shortchange everything when I could. And I certainly didn't want accountability because I didn't want anybody noticing what I wasn't doing. But again, I feel like it's so fortunate that I got to the point, not that I had something that I cared about more, because I always cared about things, but I wasn't able to follow through the way I wanted to. The thing that changed was just that I became absolutely convinced that this kind of consistency and accountability were required to be able to tolerate my life. And really, at first, I just wanted to tolerate my life. But quickly, once that started working pretty well, then I was like, why don't we go for liking my life? Like enjoying, appreciating my life. And then, so it was, it was slow for me appreciating this quality of diligence. And, it was probably bucking something that I was taught when I was little. But for me now, that's like neither here nor there. The thing that matters to me is like, what am I doing now? What am I going to do to, do my part? What this diligence deepens to then in practice is great determination. And this great determination is like one of the 3 pillars that, at least in Zen Buddhism, is seen as essential. The 3 legs of a 3-legged stool that cannot stand without those 3 legs. But determination is often born out of great faith and great doubt too. These are the 3 things that go together. And so they kind of nurture each other as we go along, like a slowly building faith. Noticing that I did that technique and the thing that they told me might happen did happen, or something else happened, and that helped me. These little things as we're practicing, finding out it was interesting. It wasn't what I thought. It was something different. Little by little, that faith grows. And as we're quiet, for many of us, there can be a great doubt that becomes almost intolerable, that might whisper to you, I am the one who is not going to be able to do this. But if you have this community, if you have people around you and they're like, yeah, me too. And you're like, no, but me, I'm the one. And so it's like the faith keeps growing. The faith keeps growing, and it balances out the doubt. And this great, it's like, I feel like emotional when I think about that great determination. It's so noble. This determination swells up. That's like, whatever, I'm going to sit with this. I'm just going to sit with this, even if it never changes. And in Zen, they describe this as like a hot ball of iron that you can neither swallow nor cough up. That it's like this determination could be said to be a kind of diligence, but you can hear how it gets a life of its own. Like when you must, because it's the only way to walk this little path between doubt and faith, then people might look at you and say, you're so diligent, you're so earnest, and you're like, I'm just trying not to fall into the lava. A deepening diligence. And then what might diligence look like to a person who could be potentially relieved of doubt? It may look like incredible integrity, courage, energy, all of those things that we might say are emblematic of diligence, showing up and doing things, but just because it's easy and obvious. I wanted to share something with you that Ursula has to say, but I'm not going to end with it because she's a little tough. But it is good. Yeah, Ursula Durand. She's a Rinzai Zen Roshi, and she has a temple in Northern California. And I was talking to somebody about this today, that we have to always, it's an ongoing calibration between effort and ease. A lot of people, when they're newer to practice, might be really hard on themselves, and there's a lot of ease up, take it easy, you shouldn't be getting a headache, you shouldn't be hating yourself, but then sometimes too, it's well, if I'm just relaxed, it's well, if relaxed is what you're after, then you're there already. But but if somebody wonders why isn't, well, why do I not feel more clear, why do I not feel more free, maybe there can be a rebalancing, something brought in on the side of effort, on the side of diligence. And so here's a little something Ursula has to say about that. And she gives an example of sitting because that's what she's an expert in, but this could apply to anything. For example, you might decide you're going to sit 20 minutes in the morning. Maybe after 10 minutes it starts to feel a little uncomfortable, but still you hang in there. And then thoughts of, well, I need to do this and I need to do that, and I should make that phone call now, slowly get the upper hand. And after 15 minutes, you're almost ready to get up. Still, you try a little longer. Then, after 17 minutes, you get up. If anybody has ever sat by themselves, we've all done this, right? Even Pepper. You might say, well, whether I sit 17 minutes or 20 minutes, what's the big deal? And my meditation wasn't so great anyway. As a single act, it's no big deal. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it doesn't matter. But as you repeat it, it becomes a very big deal. Because the moment you get up, even 1 minute earlier than you said you would, you're back to preserving yourself. You want to stay in the comfort zone. We do that all day long. We indulge in those cutting corners acts all day long. Often we don't notice, and if we do notice, we justify. It's no big deal. Everybody does it. It's good enough. It is a big deal. Because those little things, those little acts based on self-partiality, as they accumulate, create a strong web that keeps you confined in a certain state and gives your life a certain flavor. So what I say about that flavor that she's pointing to is one of not trusting oneself, one of, thinking that we have limits that maybe we don't have. I feel like what this is pointing to is we don't need to be limited. We can do the hard thing. And that gives such a sense of freedom and empowerment and self-worth. Regaining what may have been initially harmed by other people, but then self-perpetuated. So I invite everyone to, see diligence as something that can be joyful and self-care and an act of self-love, to show up for yourself in your practice. And it doesn't ever have to mean that it's out of balance with compassion. It is compassion. It is compassion. That's all.